It all started back in high school. I was a naive, shy, and quite awkward 14-year-old girl. One time, I asked this one guy to our school's Sadie Hawkins dance. I knew him from a mutual friend of ours, but we really didn't talk. All I knew was that we both liked anime and manga, and that he was kind of quiet most of the time. So I wanted to be nice, and I asked him out to the dance. But little did I know that this would be the first mistake that would start years of torment. He said yes, and we agreed that we would just meet at the dance with the rest of our friends. A few hours later, I got a message on Facebook from him, and it was a long message telling me that he always had a crush on me, that I was beautiful, and that he couldn't compare my beauty to anything else because he considered that an insult to how beautiful I was. It was pretty cringy, but at the end of it, he asked if I would be his girlfriend. Is this guy serious? I thought to myself. I was uncomfortable after reading the entire message. But again, being the shy and awkward 14-year-old that I was, I told him yes. Mistake number 2. He was ecstatic and asked for my phone number so he could call me that night. And guess what? I gave it to him. Yeah, I know. Mistake number 3. He called me later that night, and I learned a lot of things that I did not want to know. One of the major things was that this guy was a massive crybaby. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that men who cry are weak, but this guy would cry at literally everything and would always play the victim. If he felt like all his friends didn't like him, cry. If he felt like no girl other than me would love him, cry. If the teacher failed all of his assignments, even though he openly admitted he didn't want to do any of the work, cry. The list goes on. I also learned that night that he had a foot fetish, and now that I'm his girlfriend, he was going to do so many things to my feet. Again, not trying to shame anyone, but as a 14-year-old girl who didn't like showing off any part of my body, I was uncomfortable, and when I went silent for a little bit, guess what he did? Cry. Because according to him, I thought he was a freak. His words, not mine. I told him no, that I didn't think that, though now I was starting to. He instantly cheered up. I think he might have been bipolar or something. He continued to call me every night, and the conversations usually were the same as the first night. He kept calling until the night of the dance. At the dance, he mentioned he never had his first kiss and how sad it was. I already had my first kiss at this point, and I'm so glad he wasn't it. I kissed him at the dance just to get it over with. However, throughout the night, he would try to kiss me even more, and even tried shoving his tongue in my mouth. It got so bad that a teacher had to pull us apart, but of course, he goes off to sulk and cry. After the dance, I got a text from him saying how magical I made the night for him, and that the kiss was delicious, not even exaggerating, and how the stupid teacher didn't understand our love. Again, not exaggerating. I was feeling pretty sick to my stomach at this point and wanted to break up with this guy, but I stayed a little bit longer. Mistake number 4. 2 days later, he asked me out on a date to the movies. Stupidly, I said yes, and he asked if one of his best friends could come and if I could bring one of my best friends since his friend found her attractive and wanted her to be his girlfriend. I told both of them no because he wasn't her type, and in all honesty, she hated him. They kept pushing me to bring her, but I kept telling them no. By the way, his best friend calls me Kill Joy Bubbles. Don't ask me why. Then he did his usual thing of crying because he didn't get what he wanted. We go to the movies that night, and his friend sits behind us. The second the lights go out, he turns my head and starts kissing me and pushing his tongue into my mouth. I tried to push him away because I was not going to let him do this to me the entire movie. Again, his friend is right behind us, and he keeps trying to kiss me. The movie finally ends, and when I get home, he sends me a text saying he was depressed, and a picture of my feet would make him feel better. I told him no, and he threatened to do something really bad, and it would be all my fault because I didn't send him a photo. Horrified at how fast he snapped, I sent him a photo. The next night, he asked if I had been naughty lately. Knowing where this was leading, I told him no. He then started crying about how I was cheating on him and that I had been being naughty but with other people instead. He then made another threat about doing something really bad. I tried to calm him down by telling him that I was a virgin and was not a sexual person at all. He suddenly, as if on a dime, stops his fit and asks me if we could just completely forget about what just happened. I tried telling him that what he did was incredibly inappropriate and was about to tell him to leave me alone. But he pulls the victim card again and starts crying. During the crying, he asked for another picture of my feet to calm him down. Scared he was going to snap again, I sent him another picture. This continued for a few more days. He would try and message me whenever I was busy after school, babysitting, volunteer work, etc., accusing me of cheating, playing the victim, and asking for pictures of my feet to calm him down. I eventually had enough, and after 2 weeks of dating him, I broke off the relationship. He cried, of course, and begged that we at least stayed friends. The school year was ending, and he said he was transferring to a new school, so I figured I would never see him again. But boy, was I wrong. At the beginning of the school year, he would message me, and when I didn't respond, he would cry and threaten to do something really bad. After a while, I just started to ignore the messages and threatened to call the police if he didn't stop messaging me. I thought he would have stopped after that, right? Wrong. Every year up until I turned 21, he would message me random things at random times. Examples: "Hey, my friend, we're friends, right?" I gave him the silent treatment. "Can you send me a pic of your feet? I miss you. I'll leave you alone if you want me to. I'm pathetic, aren't I?" And so much more. I ignored him each time and finally blocked him on every platform he tried to contact me on. Fast forward and I'm 21. I'm in college a ways away from my town and from him and have a boyfriend. I got a notification from Instagram. It was him. He started following my profile. I quickly blocked him, and not even 5 minutes later, I got a message from Facebook from a random profile I didn't know. The message read, "Why did you block me on Instagram?" I completely lost it. That was enough for me. I was furious. I sent him a long message telling him that if he ever contacted me in any way, shape, or form, I would get a restraining order on him. I also told him how damaging that would be to his reputation and his future career. Again, he played the victim card and told me that he couldn't believe he fell for a liberal junkie like me, and to never contact him again. I sighed in relief. Yeah, you can say that again. I never heard from him again, and good riddance. A few months later, I got a message from a girl who used to date him as well. She told me he used to threaten to do something really bad and horrible if she told him she ever left him. I was essentially homeless about 7-8 years ago, after breaking up with someone. Among other factors, I found a room in a boarding house. One of the other boarders was a guy around my age. I remember the first time I saw him was when I got out of the shower and was walking back to my room. He stared me down, but I thought it was kind of a whoops moment. Like he was just looking out into the hall and seeing someone and didn't mean to make eye contact. The next day, there was a note under my door basically saying, "Hey, I'm your housemate. Let me know if you need anything or want to hang out." Having come out of a few bad situations, I was without many people, so we struck up a friendship. Over time, it became apparent he had a crush on me, but it soon became very creepy. The more I learned about him, the more, let's say, off I realized he was. He had 2 or maybe 3 kids, all with different women. Whatever, that's fine. But custody? None with any of them. He had unsupervised visitation with one of them and had to go to supervised visitation with the other. As far as the 3rd child, well, his girlfriend moved away to get away from him and wouldn't tell him if the child even existed or not. Due to the issues with his kids and exes, he started to self-medicate with alcohol. He did this purposefully, as he admitted this was why he was doing it, getting blackout drunk to deal with his feelings. And that's when the stalking started. One night during one of his blackouts, I thought I could calm him down, so I went to his room to keep the landlady from calling the cops. He grabbed my arms, pinned them to my side, and then laid on top of me, pinning me between him and the floor. I got out and ran. The police ended up being called, but he wasn't kicked out. After that, his obsession grew out of what I can only think was some sort of psychopathic guilt. Instead of apologizing and staying sober, he started tracking my movements. With this, more letters showed up under my door. A lot of them were angry. The one I remember most was him essentially accusing me of cheating on him. It was like a rambling manifesto, with things about how he knows I must be lying to him about having a boyfriend now, because he left a cigarette between my door and the door jamb. And because it wasn't crushed or didn't fall out, that meant I never came home and I had to have a boyfriend I was staying the night with. This would then be followed by strange text messages, telling me I deserve everything bad that happened to me because I apparently used him. Which was basically just, you won't be my girlfriend, so you're a user because I'm not getting what I want from you. I only lived there about 5 to 6 weeks, but this started about a few days in, and only ended when I finally said screw it and moved into a weekly studio that was far more expensive. I'd just gotten a job and had the ability to pay for it, and since I was genuinely afraid for my safety, I made sure to leave when I knew he wouldn't be there. My first serious boyfriend stalked me for about 5 years after I broke up with him. The reason I broke up with him is because I noticed him becoming increasingly possessive and controlling. This worried me a lot, as I was really young at the time and he was older than me. So that was it for me, and I decided to get out before things got worse. The breakup itself was so brutal. He cried, screamed, and begged. Right after the breakup, his behavior seemed like the harmless actions of a bitter ex. Constant texting, phone calls, sending gifts to my workplace, that sort of thing. After about 6 months, when this hadn't died down, I started bumping into him on my way home from work or if I was out shopping, so I ended up moving. I couldn't leave my job immediately, but moving house didn't make a difference anyway. This behavior continued for a few years and became increasingly worse. I'd rather not go into too much detail, but yeah, he did some crazy shit. The police were very reluctant to do anything. I moved every 6 to 9 months and changed jobs twice, but somehow he always managed to track me down. I didn't use social media and even insisted friends of mine not take any pictures of me in case they posted them on social media. I kept my phone number within my circle of friends, but somehow he always managed to get my new number. I ended up a paranoid wreck, thinking that one of my friends had betrayed me, or that my phone company had me listed in a phone book and all other kinds of crazy thoughts. Then another year passed, and as our encounters got worse, again, I'd rather not go into detail, I decided to report him to the police again, and this time they took some action. At this stage, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't concentrate at work. I was an absolute emotional wreck. About 2 months after I reported him to the police, I woke up one morning to a story in the newspapers about staff in the National Tax Office using resources improperly. And guess who the main perpetrator was? My ex, using his job to access all of my information. In his job, he had access to my tax records, which meant every time I changed my job, address, or phone number, he had access to the most up-to-date information. Before the court case began, he committed suicide, and I'm not ashamed to say I cried with relief. They were the worst years of my adult life. When I was about 19 years old, I met this guy who worked at the subway near where I worked. He was a nice enough guy, and he took me out on a date. Everything started off well, but about a week into it, he started asking me for money. It started off small at first, like for a soda or $5 for gas. Then he started asking for larger amounts, like a few hundred to get him by for a week or so. I never gave it to him, but he started wanting to move in together within about 2 weeks of dating. When we would go out places, he started to do very weird things. He would start screaming in public, or singing nonsense at the top of his lungs. He would always play around afterward that he was just having fun, but it was weird and embarrassing to be seen with him. Also, my dog, who loves everyone, would not let him near me. I've never seen that dog so much as growl at another person. but he would try and bite the shit out of him when he came close to me. By the end of the second week, I broke up with him over the phone. I normally didn't do that, but at the time his erratic and weird behavior made me nervous and extremely uncomfortable. Of course, he didn't handle this breakup well at all. He completely flipped the fuck out. He started showing up where I worked. It got so bad at one point that my manager had to ban him from the building and coworkers walked me to my car. He would show up literally everywhere I was, even at the grocery store or the gas station. I started getting text messages and weird emails about how we were meant to be and how he couldn't live without me and such. Then one day, he showed up in the middle of the night and told me to come outside. I told him to leave, or I was going to call the cops. He literally started sobbing to the point where he was almost hyperventilating. I went back inside the house and locked the door. The next day, I was home alone and just doing some work at the time I was in college, when I heard some rustling by the front door. I thought it was just the dog messing around or the mailman or something, but the dog started barking and growling. The doorbell began to ring. I didn't think much of it, probably just a solicitor. Then someone started messing with the door handle. I grabbed a broom of all things because it was the nearest object I could find. I heard someone open the door. My dog then tried to bite whomever it was. I freaked out, locked myself in the bathroom, and started screaming that I called the police. They ran away shortly after. I called my neighbor who lived across the street from me and was former military. He checked out the house and made sure he was gone. My dog had a few scrapes and cuts on him, but he was okay. I knew this had to have been my ex, so I filed for a restraining order the next day, and my dad took the liberty of calling his father and explaining what happened. I received a few emails from him following that, but he never came to my house again. Luckily, I've moved a few hours away, and I'm married now, but it was still very frightening at the time, considering this was only about a 3-week period. I was in middle school at the time, in 8th grade when this happened. This was around when Formspring.me became popular. It's just one of those anonymous question-asking websites for those who don't know. Anyways, I had one of those, and one day, Monday specifically, I started getting these creepy submissions saying stuff like, "I watch you going down so-and-so street after school all the time. You're so beautiful, baby. I want to make you mine so badly." Stuff like that. But at this point, it kind of just weirded me out, and I didn't think too much about it, since it was likely a friend of mine just screwing with me, so I took down my Formspring site and went about my day. The next day, I started receiving creepy emails from someone I didn't know. They started to get really creepy, like they were mentioning my teachers' names, asking me to meet them at the park so they could touch me, and described in detail some horrible things that I won't mention for obvious reasons. Yeah, real graphic shit. Ugh, what a twisted weirdo this has to be, I said to myself. I rolled my eyes and started getting really annoyed, but I also freaked out and began blocking the emails, but they realized this and started making new emails to send me every day. I didn't really want to tell my parents this since I still thought that it was maybe a joke, but I ended up breaking on that Wednesday after my school administration did nothing about it. They kept me in from school on Thursday, and on Friday they called the police. The police eventually found out that it was just some random quiet kid in my math class, whom I've never talked to, nor had mutual friends with. This was probably the scariest thing that's happened to me, just because the emails were so descriptive and because the kid was just some random kid I didn't know at all. I was so young and all of my friends never took it seriously. I really couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and I was always shivering from fear, I guess. Thinking about it just makes me really uncomfortable. That kid ended up getting expelled from my middle school and wasn't allowed to go to my high school district. I ended up getting a 4-year restraining order on him. It was a bit sad because my parents said in court that the kid's parents were really apologetic. But apparently his sister, who was 2 years older than me, told a bunch of people I ruined his life since he ended up having to go do community service or whatever you call it these days. In the legal aspect, my parents kept me pretty sheltered from it afterward. Let me tell you a story about this guy I met while hiking once. We talked for a little while. One thing I noticed is that when we first spoke, he spoke with a slight medieval British accent. Then after a while, it went back to a normal American accent. Anyway, we found each other interesting and exchanged Facebook info. After a few days of talking online, we decided to meet up at a library. Everything seemed fine, and there were no red flags. Not yet, at least. He seemed like a nice guy at first. However, shortly after meeting him, I began noticing strange things about him. I began to notice his eccentric way of talking. He talked like an old-school philosopher. If I asked him a question, he would respond with a question. That got kind of annoying, but I brushed it off as just being silly. I went to his house after the first date. I met his mom. She was sweet, but she hoarded cats and was a chain smoker. I went to his room, and after a little while of talking, he stood up and soliloquized. "Okay, so your bed is going here, and my bed is going to be arranged there." "What?" I said with confusion. "You're going to move in with me. I'm trying to think where our beds should go." "Dude, I just met you like 2 days ago. What makes you think I'll be moving in with you?" "I desire a queen," he said, with that creepy medieval tone and eyes that looked like they bore deep into my soul. Absolutely not. Once I had enough of him, he kept messaging me on Facebook non-stop. I, of course, blocked him. That wasn't enough, though. I recall him creating about a dozen Facebook accounts with weird play-on-word names like Miss Terry or Olive You and such. Real creepy. He kept sending me messages at all hours of the night, and I kept blocking and reporting each one. I remember one saying he was out to destroy my reputation because I had the nerve to leave him. Then, after the dozenth email, he said, "You are gonna regret this." It's been a few years now, and I haven't heard anything from him since. I'm a female, and this happened to me during my first year of university in October. I was living in the dorms at the time, but before I get into this story, I need to give you a brief rundown of the dorms. You need a key card to gain access to your specific floor. So even though someone on the 3rd and 4th floor lives in the same building, they can't access each other's floors. I had injured myself playing sports, so I was under orders to rest up, which meant no Halloween parties for me. What a bummer. Pretty sad for a horror fiend like myself. But to try and make the time a happy one, I kept myself occupied by helping make costumes for people and doing their makeup. Once I was finally finished, I packed up my makeup and decided to watch some movies in my room. A guy popped up and introduced himself. We chatted for a bit and exchanged email addresses. Then I walked back to my room and said goodnight. Well, the first warning sign was that he walked into my room behind me, despite me saying I was going to walk into my room. I felt really awkward and tried to say, in a roundabout way, that he needed to leave, but he wasn't getting the hint. So I finally said, "You need to leave my room now." He left immediately after, and I chalked this up to him maybe being drunk or something, but I did wonder how he got onto my floor if he wasn't with anyone partying. Before I went to bed that night, I checked my email and there were 5 new messages from this creep. The first being, "Hey, I'm so glad that we're friends." And in the rest of the messages, he was asking why I wasn't online. A few days later, I got a knock on my door while I was studying, and guess who it was? It was him. I explained that I was studying and needed privacy. He then tried to walk into my room again, but I braced my arm on the frame and said firmly again that I needed to study. He finally got the memo and left. The next day, he was at my door again. Oh my goodness, can this guy just leave me alone? I began pretending that I was not home. The following day, there was a knock at the door, and when I checked the peephole, there was no one there. I assumed the postman had come, so I opened the door, and lo and behold, it was the creepy guy. Now he started hiding from the peephole, so I would be more likely to answer the door. Can you believe this guy? I told my roommate never to open the door if he was there, and then I told the people living on my floor that this guy was beginning to creep me out, so if he wanted to get on the floor or whatever sob story he gave them, I told them not to let him on the floor, please. A few days after that, I was on the bus coming home and I got a text from someone who lived on my floor telling me not to come home because Mr. Creep was on my floor and he was sitting in front of my door, just waiting for me. To hell with that. I went to a friend's house and spent the night. When I got home, I was told he waited for 4 hours before leaving. At this point, I was getting freaked out. A few days after that, he began waiting outside the building, and if I left, he would follow me wherever I went. I was too spineless to tell him to go away, and I tried to be more passive about it. I never spoke a word to him, and I never gave him any indication that I was paying attention. But he still followed me to class and the cafeteria. He always tried to follow me home and get access to the floor. I went to the resident advisor, an older student who sort of watches over the floor, and told her what happened. She spoke to the RA for his floor, and was told that Mr. Creep had been telling his own RA that we were best friends and dating. My RA tried to explain that I was uncomfortable, but the other RA believed him, and that was that. Thankfully, one thing did deter him. He would never approach me if I was with a group of people, so my floor mates banded together. If I went to dinner, I went with my floor, and if I wanted a drink or seconds, someone had to come with me. Walking to class and even waiting for the bus was done in a group. He got onto my floor once when someone else was coming home, and he forced his foot in the door to let himself in. I was hidden in another room, and when he left my door to go and sit in the television lounge to wait for me, I went downstairs and ran around to the other side of the building and got into my room before he noticed. Then the phone calls began. I never gave him my number, but he somehow obtained my mobile and room phone number. At first, it would be 1 to 2 phone calls a day from him, until I told him I wanted him to leave me alone. Then the calls began coming in every hour with him begging and pleading for me to talk to him. Without caller ID, I needed to answer the phone because of school and my part-time job. At this point, it was November and I was a wreck. I was tired of having to plan out doing simple things like going for food or walking to a bus stop. Stress wasn't helping me recover from my injury and I was losing weight and I just looked sickly. I went back to the RA and begged her to help me. She went to the head of the dorms and explained everything that happened. I explained how far this had gone, and my roommate told them that he had followed her a few times, demanding that she tell him where I was. I felt awful. She never told me this because she was afraid of upsetting me further, and I felt like I was an asshole for putting her through this garbage. I don't know what went on behind closed doors, but from what I can guess, he was told to leave me alone, and any further contact would result in him being kicked out of the dorms. There was one email where he went insane on me, telling me how awful I was and things like, how could I do this to him? He said that we were so happy together and that surely I was cheating on him with other men. This guy was a total nutcase. After that, nothing. At first, when I'd see him around campus, I would run to the women's restroom to hide. I'd see him around town or on campus, and he'd always just stare at me. He never tried to approach me or get my attention. Just staring. Real creepy. I used to walk by and try to pretend like I didn't notice him staring, and I'd try and act like my heart wasn't pounding. It's been a few months now. Haven't seen or heard from him since. And let's just hope it stays that way. A couple years back, when I was in college, I was the victim of a long-term stalker. I'm a male, and I was 20 at the time. Things started out fairly innocuous on Valentine's Day. I started to receive secret admirer-type text messages from an unknown number. I assumed it was a friend of mine playing a joke on me as I was in a room with a handful of tech-savvy people at the time. I tried to gauge their reactions and asked if anyone was messing with me. They all denied it, and I believed them, even though they were all pretty bad liars. Well, it was further confirmed that it was none of them when I got a phone call from that same unknown number. I answered, and a female voice on the other end asked, "Is this Andy?" I'm not gonna lie, she sounded kinda cute. Yes, I replied. "Who is this?" I asked, hoping I could get a response and identify the voice. At that point, they hung up and resumed texting. Things started to get weird when the person began asking pretty personal questions, including repeatedly asking, "Are you doing something tonight?" To which I replied, "Yes." I was working that night, but they kept insisting we should meet up. On top of all this, I was getting various images sent to me from a separate email address. The email address was at TextNow. I knew TextNow is an app where you can get a temporary phone number. This confirmed it wasn't a real number, and now I had a username to connect this person to. I don't know if it was their intention, but I actually enjoy trying to figure out shit like this and took it upon myself to expose this person without giving away anything about myself. So I kept it up. I texted them back for a while and dug out more and more information about the person, compiling it into a profile and eliminating possibilities. Unfortunately, this just encouraged them, as they insisted I send them pictures. Then they sent me a very odd picture. It was a picture of a white lacy dress hanging in their closet with the accompanying text, "My wedding dress for when I marry you," with various heart and love emojis. What the fuck? I thought to myself. Is this person being serious? They continued to pry about where I was going to be that evening, and I still refused to give details. Then, they told me where they were going to be, a party on campus that night. I couldn't go regardless. I was working. Then I got another bombshell. They asked if I lived in apartment 68, which I did. I recognized the style of the apartment they were in based on a picture they sent from earlier, so I decided I'd throw a curveball. "You live in this complex, right?" I sent them a picture of the apartment complex.
"What? How do you know?"
They responded. I just told them that I recognized their door. All the shitty apartments had the same color door frame, which was visible on the edge of a picture they sent. The conversation kind of fizzled out after that. I didn't go to that party and didn't get any more texts. Fast forward to October. The following school year, I was a senior and busy as hell. One evening, I got a text from an unknown number.
"Is this Andy Vega?"
They said my full name, so I played dumb, pretending like I wasn't freaking out that after many months this person was contacting me again and I still hadn't figured out who it was. These questions were instantly more personal and really weirded me out. "Okay, who is this?" I asked.
"Don't ruin the fun. Not knowing who I am is part of the mystery. I won't tell you who I am, not now. Too much to lose. I don't want you to know. Not because I'm being cruel, but it's just better if you didn't know."
Yeah, whatever. I'm pretty tired of this shit. I'm trying to work, but I do want to see if I can pick out any more details. So I'm doing the bare minimum to keep this going. It was December, the end of the semester, and they proceeded to call me multiple times. I blocked every call, but they kept calling. I think there were like 14 calls that night. I turned my phone off after that. The following week, I was in class, and students were presenting their final work on the projector. I'd queued multiple tabs on the projection computer. 2 different students had their work saved on Google Drive. When the student logged into their account, they didn't open a private window, so it logged out the first student. I saw this happen, but the first student wasn't in the room, so when she came back, I asked her to log back in. We were both standing in the projection booth. She was at one end on the computer, and I was messing with the sound system on the other side, but happened to turn and look at the projector screen when she was logging into Google. This hit me like a ton of bricks. The username she logged in with was the same username as the TextNow account that had been sending me photos. I quickly turned away and pretended to be busy with something until she finished opening her work. I thanked her, and she left the booth without realizing her mistake. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was going crazy for the rest of the class. After almost a year, I knew who it was. She finally slipped up, and honestly, I was much more scared now than I had ever been. This person had a history of being pretty creepy around my friends, and although she had never personally interacted with me outside of class, all my friends had strange experiences. I made a meeting with a counselor who seemed to really care and offered to look into it. A couple of weeks later, I got an email from the counselor saying that this student is going abroad next semester, so we're not going to do anything. I insisted that at least something temporary be put into place. They didn't do anything, but what did I expect? This school is pretty notorious for not giving a shit anyway. I didn't run into her again after that. She hasn't texted me either. So for the time being, That is where the story ends. I'm a female, and I've had a couple of stalkers. The one that freaked me out the most was in another country, and we never met. His name is Michael. This all started after we met on a website for pen pals. He lived in another country. Our conversations were great at first, but he soon developed feelings extremely fast. I liked Michael a lot in the beginning. Our relationship became sexual in nature, we made plans to meet, etc. I was, however, concerned with some things that I considered to be red flags, and this was confirmed by my friends and family. I decided to back off a bit. He didn't like that at all. I was super beta, so I tried to keep the peace without hurting or losing him. I started lying to him, out of fear. He'd interrogate me for hours about where I was going and who I was with. If I went to a party, he'd ask if I slept with anyone, and then say he'd kind of hoped I had, so I could tell him how the sex was. It was getting to be too much. I was no longer interested in him romantically or sexually, but I would still engage with him sexually because I was afraid of him. In the meantime, I met and fell in love with my current boyfriend, who is absolutely wonderful. But of course, after he found out about the new guy, he began stalking me. He was obsessed with everything about my new relationship and wouldn't leave me alone. I finally realized that my ex-stalker made me feel disgusting, and that I should not be involved with someone who I was afraid of and disgusted by. I told him I didn't want to hear from him ever again. He ignored me. My boyfriend contacted him and told him to leave me alone. He tried to interrogate my boyfriend about the nature of our relationship, but my boyfriend shut him down. I blocked him on everything. Later, I realized that he was still reading my blog, so I deleted the whole thing. He made new email accounts and Facebook accounts constantly. He relentlessly Googled me and my boyfriend, to the point that our names were amongst the top searches on multiple search engines. When he got no response, he started sending my boyfriend screenshots of times we had been sexual. I was humiliated. But since I had been 100% honest with my boyfriend, it didn't break us up. But my boyfriend was obviously angry and disgusted. We never responded to anything he sent. To my knowledge, he still creeps on us, but after that, everything mostly stopped. I know he's thousands of miles away, and I've had stalkers who were in my immediate area, but he still scares me the most. This was a crazy experience. Let me give you a little backstory. I'm a 20-year-old, short, petite female, and I was working at Subway at the time. I'm a calm person, and I can't help but be nice to anyone, even if they creep me out. I feel bad, usually. Well, about a year ago, we had this guy who was between 35 to 40 years old. He would come in every day for lunch. He was fascinated by my stretched ears and few piercings I had on my face and always asked questions. He would sit down after I rang him out and watch me from his table for 2 hours. Non-stop just staring at me while I helped other customers. This continued like clockwork for about 2 weeks straight. Every day, he would ask for my number, saying he has plugs and tunnels he wants to give me and see me wearing them in my ears, but I always politely declined. One day, I'm alone in the store because my manager had to run to the bank. We were really slow that day, so I was just in the back room messing around on my phone. I heard the door chime, looked up, and yet no one was there. Then I saw the man walk past the front of the store really quickly, like he was in a hurry. Then the store phone rings. "Thanks for calling Subway. How can I help you?"
Hey, this is the girl with the nice ears, right?
Yes? Who is this?
Are you alone in the back room right now? Are you working by yourself?
At this point, I got really creeped out and knew it was him. Why would he want to know if I'm working by myself? I hung up and texted my manager the situation so she would hurry back. He called again, this time asking me very weird questions, like what I would do with him in a room with the door locked if I had a boyfriend, or why I was playing hard to get, etc. My manager got back and I told her everything. In the middle of the lunch rush, he calls again. This time my manager answers, and to this day she never told me what he said, but the look on her face made my spine shiver. She told him if he ever called again or showed up here, she would call the police. I thought that was the end of it, but alas, I was wrong. About a week later, I'm clocking out and getting ready to walk to my car parked in the front, and when I look outside, I see him standing by my car and looking inside of it. I was an idiot and left a back door unlocked. I watched him crawl inside and shut the door. Not even kidding. This creep was trying to hide in my back seat and do God knows what to me when I got in. My manager locked the front door of our store and called the police. When they arrived, they had to pretty much drag him out of my car, and he was arrested on the scene. The cops searched him and found a butcher knife, rope, and a rag with chloroform on it. If I hadn't looked up when I did, I probably wouldn't be here right now. I'm just grateful that Creep was arrested. This happened to me a few years ago. I'm a female, and my anxiety was super high at the time. I was already at a point in my life where I thought I was a little out of it, but that was amplified by a lot when I kept repeatedly hearing noises outside my window. This kept happening every single night. It just wouldn't stop. I would finally get so freaked out that I'd go wake my parents up and get them to look outside, but they never found anything. I started to think I was going crazy or just subconsciously seeking attention. One morning, my grandfather discovered one of our lawn chairs beneath our bathroom window. It's pretty high up and the bottom pane is fogged. So I'm not sure if the chair even helped, but it was left there regardless. The next night, I heard sounds again. Then, the following night, we checked outside and discovered something that made my stomach churn. A small stepladder was sitting directly outside of my window. It was backed just enough to allow someone to sit on it, but still see through my windows. There was a bag of McDonald's, which is just up the street from me. Most of the food was still in there. It was cold, but still. Somebody had been watching me doing absolutely nothing of interest in my room without me knowing for I don't know how long. This creeped me out and I called the cops, but of course, they were no help, because whoever it was that was out there was long gone by now. I felt crazier than ever, but at least we had some evidence that someone was hovering around our house at my window, watching intently through the blinds, in a space between the two curtains. I heard noises the next night, so I ran outside and there was nothing. Earlier in the night, I'd sewn my curtains together, which hopefully made it harder to see in. Apparently, it did, because now they started climbing on top of our air conditioning unit, and from there, he'd climb onto our garbage. He would be standing so he could see above where the drapes went. We saw handprints and shoe prints on the lid to prove that he was there. I should also mention that there were now holes in my screen, and I heard when these holes were made. He took a stick and sharpened it somehow. We know because we found it outside my window. This guy was trying to be stealthy and break away the screen bit by bit. The holes are still there. The following night, I was lying in bed about to fall asleep when all of a sudden, I distinctly heard the sound of gravel crunching near my window. There was simply no mistaking the sound. As stealthily as I could, I let out a small moan, which he surely heard, and I rolled just out of view as if I were sleeping. Then, I pressed myself against a wall out of view of the window, very quietly opened my door and crept down the hall. My heart was pounding. Normally I knock on my parents' door, but I knew the slightest sound would make the bastard bolt, so I quietly opened their door and sneaked in, then informed them that there was, without a single doubt, someone outside my window. They didn't mind the intrusion and got up, got dressed, formulated a plan, and crept to the back door. I ran to the bathroom to stand on the edge of our tub to peek out the window just as the back door was thrown open and my parents ran outside. And sure enough, they saw him. They started screaming as the man leaped off the garbage and bolted down our driveway, which was what I was looking at. They screamed all sorts of horrible things at the tops of their lungs. He ended up escaping across the street, hiding behind a house adjacent to us. The balls on this bastard. He kept peeking out at us as we all stood outside, but we wanted to leave him there so the cops could finally nab him. We called the cops. They came and searched the whole area, but they never found him. The bastard must have hopped a fence or some shit. Still to this day, I hear sounds outside my window, even in the dead of winter, but he's never out there. He might have just been a peeper, but he targeted me specifically and for months until he was almost caught. What really pisses me off is that once he lost interest in me because it was too unsafe, He moved on to a house down the street with 2 little girls. He actually managed to get in through their window, and their dad caught him just standing in the middle of the room, watching them sleep. I still don't think he was caught, even then. All I know is that it could have been way worse, but it messed me up. I trust the men in my neighborhood even less now. The men around here stare very blatantly. I've been chased home by one. I've had a guy try to jerk me into his car when I was passing him, telling him no, I didn't need a ride and to leave me alone. All these years later, I still hear shit outside my window and freak out. I turn out my lights entirely to exercise. I do my best to avoid the windows when I undress. This whole thing left me scarred, even though it wasn't a huge deal. My ex-boyfriend was a stalker. The stalking started shortly after the breakup, but the entire relationship was in shambles. We had been friends for a few years before we started dating. It was during my junior year of high school. After we started dating, he completely became a different person. I guess his true colors really came out. He became very controlling, and he would always grab my phone and look through my text messages and call logs. He wanted to be together literally all the time, no matter what, even if I was studying. He had already graduated high school and worked full-time. I'd have random crazy girls calling me, telling me they were going to beat me up or they were going to sleep with my man. He'd be insanely jealous at times, and when we'd fight, he'd get so mad that he'd throw his phone across the room or across the street. The whole relationship was crazy, and I tried to end it at least 6 to 7 times over the year and a half span of it all. Every time we'd break up, he'd go batshit crazy and do the I'm going to harm myself fit. He'd call over and over again, then want to talk for hours until eventually I would finally say, "If I agree to get back together with you, will you back off for a bit and give me some space?" Not healthy, yeah, I know, but I had stuff to do. Sports, school, and a job. I didn't have time to deal with this. It was easier just to agree to get back together. There was this one time I broke up with him, and he told me he had been having headaches. So he went to the doctor that day and found out that he had a brain aneurysm and only had 8 months to live. We had 2 friends die in car accidents on the same day, exactly 1 year apart. So when I realized that 8 months from then would be the same month as our friends' deaths, I completely freaked out. And we got back together because I honestly believed we had some curse against our friends in that exact date. But wouldn't you know that those 8 months came and went without a single trip back to the doctor for his brain aneurysm? So here's where it gets crazy. During my senior year, I had no idea how to get out of this relationship. So I started looking into out-of-state colleges, figuring there was no way he'd follow me. If I could just put up with the craziness until that summer, I'd be off in a magical world of college and no crazy boyfriend. He must have seen the brochure from the college I was interested in because suddenly he wanted to go to that college. He even went as far as taking the SAT. I knew my plan wasn't going to work at that point. He'd follow me wherever I went. So, what did I do? I decided to join the army. That'll show him. I thought that was the perfect plan. Let's see him try following me in there, right? The next thing I know, he's meeting with a damn recruiter. Of course, the likelihood of him being stationed where I was is very slim, but I didn't know that at the time. I was young, scared, and a bit naive. I realized the army was a dumb idea and wrote a letter to the commander? Commissioner? I don't know what they call them these days. Anyways, to whoever is the head honcho of recruitments. I explained that I had lied on my physical, as the recruiters typically tell you to do, and sent a copy of all of my medical records. I was let out shortly after that. I don't remember how it finally happened, but we broke up. I changed my phone number and cut off connection with all of our shared friends. Finally, I can breathe and relax. The end of madness. I was finally free, at last, or so I thought. For the next few months after the breakup, until I left for college, he would randomly show up where I was. The movie theater, tennis courts, and restaurants that we never went to before. He'd want to talk, but I'd always just say I had to leave immediately. He'd get furious if he saw me with another guy, no matter who the guy was. It could have been my cousin, and he would have lost it. I still have no idea how he knew where I was going. Once I left for college, which was about 90 minutes away, I thought it'd be over. I heard he had come up to my college a few times to see other friends, but I'd stay in my dorm those nights, afraid that I'd see him if I went out. During my freshman year of college, one of our close friends from that same group passed away. Sadly, he took his own life. I came home to attend the funeral. My ex was pretty distraught since this was the third friend of ours to pass away in 3 years. I had no choice but to be nice to him. I mean, it was a funeral for our good friend. After the funeral, everyone was going over to a friend's house just to spend time together. I didn't want to go, but my friends convinced me to. While at the house, my ex starts talking to me. I act polite, but try to avoid him. It doesn't work. He's right next to me all night. He was trying to kiss me, put his arm around me, or whatever he could get. Somehow this translates into him thinking we're back together. Now I just feel miserable, and I tell him I'm leaving. He freaks out. Then he got my number somehow from someone at the party. He starts texting and calling me nonstop. This continued for 5 years. 5 years until I moved out of state now and don't talk to anyone from back then anymore. Finally, the phone calls stopped. I still get weird whenever I go back to my hometown. I'm constantly surveying the area, scared and paranoid that I'm going to see him again. And if I happen to be with my significant other, I won't even venture into any part of the city that I think there's a chance he could be in. I'm a female, and I had a friend from university who definitely fits into stalker territory. We had been friends for just a couple of years, and I met him when I was a freshman. But it became clear that he had a thing for me. When we would hang out after class, he would start putting his hand through my hair and would tell me how beautiful I am. I kept rejecting him in a subtle way at first, but one day, when we were hanging out after class, he tried to kiss me. At that point, I told him no. It will never happen. We are just friends, and that's it. He didn't take this well, and he began to ignore me for the next couple of days, and I figured, whatever. We're in college. He'll get over it. Fast forward a bit, and I'm in my senior year of college. His sister goes to a university a bit south of mine, whereas he's a bit north. They ask if they can meet up at my place and stay the night so we can all get together and visit again for old time's sake. I told them that's fine with me. They came over and things went pretty well, but eventually, they both left. My roommates have some of those magnetic letters they keep on the fridge, which I don't pay much attention to. But the morning after they left, I saw one of my roommates grab a small piece of paper that was pinned on the fridge with one of the magnetic letters. She read it, then turned to me and asks,
"Did you write this?"
I read it, and my jaw dropped. It was this ridiculously over-the-top love poem that was written for me. I was immediately horrified because I knew exactly who wrote this. She then showed it to my other roommate, and they both started laughing their asses off. A few days later, I got an email from the guy friend. In the email, he talks about the poem, and how he saw me reading it, and how hot that was, or whatever. Huh? I thought to myself. Now I'm trying to figure out how in the world he could have seen me reading a poem I never saw until after he'd already left. More time passes by while I try my best to avoid him in the hopes that he'll get the message to leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with him anymore. He became a creep after that. I've been trying to avoid him for months now. I started looking at jobs online abroad for when I graduate. Then, to my surprise, I got another email from him. This time he said, "If you're going to get a job abroad, then we really need to get married soon." What? I totally ignored it. First of all, how did he even know? Well, not too long after, he sent another email and said,
"We need to get married so that I can get your support when I come with you."
This guy has to be a certified lunatic. I'm sure he's saying this because he has no desire to learn the language of the country I'm planning on going to. He figures this is a mutually beneficial arrangement, as eventually, I'll be able to profit off of the tax deductions one gets from being married. So even though he knows I'm not interested in him, he thinks this is clearly the most logical option for me, so I don't wind up dying sad and alone after paying full taxes my whole life. Then he devolves the topic and goes into this ramble about how he hates characters in TV shows and books who do the whole, "I just want the person I love to be happy," whoever that's with. I replied to the email, completely pissed off and more creeped out than I ever have been in my life. He seems to get the message, apologizes, and I cut off all ties as best as I can. But most of our friends are mutual, and I'm pretty close to his family. Fast forward a bit, and I found out that he has a girlfriend now. I figure this is good. Maybe he's moving on. To my surprise, she adds me on Facebook and starts talking to me. Then she goes on about how the sex with him is amazing and I'm really missing out. I tell her I'm in no way interested. She goes on about her other boyfriend back home, and how all 4 of us could get married together on the same day. Absolutely not. Completely repulsed, I blocked her. That whole thing was just weird. It's been 3 years since then, and now he's back in my hometown and moved in with the only 3 close friends I have from high school. They seem to think he's finally over it. I just hope I don't have to deal with any more of this, so that I can finally just live my life in peace. Just for reference, I'm a female and I live alone in a very small 2-bedroom house in my town. It's a quiet suburban town on the outskirts of a large city. My dating life has been pretty hectic for the past couple years, having bad experiences with relationships. I took a year off, trying to focus on myself and not let anyone new into my life. While this did help me feel better most of the time, it didn't help with some things. This happened just a few months ago and it still has me really shaken up. It started one night when I got home from work. I was upstairs changing out of my work clothes when I heard a knock at the door. I dressed up and went to the front door, looking out the peephole, but I didn't see anyone on my porch. I opened the door and stuck my head out, looking around, but there was still no one there. I closed the door. I thought it must just be a prank or maybe someone that had the wrong house. I went about my night forgetting about it. The next morning, though, I woke up to a knock at the door again. It was 6 a.m., which was a bit earlier than I had wanted to get up, so I stayed in bed. An hour or so later, I checked to see if there was a package delivered, but there was nothing. That's when I started to feel uneasy, knowing that there was someone knocking at my door at different times of the day for seemingly no reason. I made sure everything was locked up before I went to work. I told a few of my friends at work about the strange knocking, and they all seemed to think it was really creepy, but nobody had any ideas on what to do about it. I left work that night, even more uneasy. While driving down my neighborhood road, a part of me didn't even want to go home because I was worried that the knocking would continue, or even escalate to something much worse. When I pulled in front of my house, though, I saw a figure standing at my front door. I stopped the car halfway in the driveway. The person heard my brake skid and immediately ran away. They went down the sidewalk and around one of my neighbors' houses, running off into the woods. I stayed in my car. After seeing that, I was just too scared to get out. In short, I called the police and an officer came to talk to me, but there was nothing that could be done without a way to identify the person. And they hadn't necessarily done anything wrong yet. The officer left, making me feel no safer than before. 2 more days went by, but there were no more knocks on my door, and I never saw anyone standing by my house during those days. Well, I thought it was finally over, but I was wrong. On a Wednesday after work, I got home at 7, parked in my garage, and walked inside. I went right upstairs and changed clothes, then went back down to make dinner. As I flicked on the hallway light, I saw a man sitting at the table in my kitchen, just 10 to 15 feet away from me. He was already looking at me, and it was then that I recognized his face as that of my ex-boyfriend from the year before. He had no emotion. He just looked dead inside. I was so scared and I wasn't sure what to do. He calmly asked me to sit at the table with him, but I was frozen, standing in the hallway. He said he just wanted to talk to me and that he wanted my forgiveness. From our short 1-month relationship last year, I knew he was very unstable, and that was the biggest reason for ending things. The whole time he was talking and reciting this memorized speech he had of some sort, I was thinking of any possible way to get out of this safely. All I could think of was to run back upstairs and call the police. So that's what I did. I sprinted up the stairs and locked the door behind me, dialing 911 as he banged on the door, screaming at me to let him in. I was in tears, hearing slight cracks in the wood as he fiercely kicked and punched the door. Then he stopped and started talking again in a creepy, peaceful manner. I told him I would talk to him outside and that I needed to feel safe if we were to get back together. He paused for a moment. Then he agreed. I heard his footsteps walking downstairs. Minutes later, Police showed up. I heard an officer yell for him to stop, but he was able to get away. Not for long, though. They arrested him a day later at his apartment. The charges piled on as they found evidence of stalking on his phone. He had hundreds of pictures of my house, including ones of me getting home from work, checking the mailbox, and even some looking through the windows into my living room. The pictures were all taken within the last 3 months, though, so it's not clear why he started stalking me so long after our breakup. This was definitely the most disturbing thing I've ever been through. I worked the closing shift at my local grocery store during my gap year between high school and college. I was a cashier, so I interacted with people pretty much all day long. After around 7 o'clock, though, there would only be a few customers an hour, and during the last hour of 9 p.m., I'd maybe get 2 or 3 customers. Then I had a few things to do. Things like refilling the bags and cleaning up the counters. I would leave the store at 10:15 every night. The lead, who also worked in the front end or cashier department with me, had to stay a bit later to empty the registers and count the money. So, I'd always be the only one leaving at that time of night. One day, after a regular shift at work, I clocked out and walked to my car in the parking lot. It was late and the only cars in the lot were from the few coworkers still in the store, but someone's car was parked right next to mine and had their headlights on. I walked around to my car and got in, trying to get situated quickly, but I couldn't help but look over and see who it was. When I turned my head, the man in the car was staring right at me. I quickly shifted my eyes forward, but I think that only made things more weird. Knowing he was likely still looking at me, I put the car in drive and got out of there. The next day, I was talking with one of the managers at the store and brought up the man in the parking lot. I asked if maybe they hired someone new for overnight stalking, but they said no. I mentioned the weird encounter in the parking lot, and we both laughed about it. We thought it was just some coincidence of some sort that someone was parked there. I was off the next day, but the day after, I worked the closing shift again. Everything was fine and normal up until 8. I hadn't had a customer in 15 minutes, so I was kind of just looking off into the store when I noticed the man walking around. He had nothing in his hands and no cart or basket. He was just walking up and down the aisles aimlessly. Once I took notice, I saw him glance over at me several times. I thought I looked weird for watching him, even though I was trying to be discreet about it. So I shifted my eyes elsewhere and tried to not be creepy. A few minutes later, I saw the man in the corner of my eye. He was standing in the aisle directly in line with my checkout lane. I looked over and the man was facing the shelves, but his head was turned and he was staring at me. It was then that I recognized his face and eyes as the man I'd seen in the parking lot a couple of days ago. A cold rush went through me as I looked away, but I could see him in the corner of my eye, still standing there. Once he finally walked out of the aisle, I lost track of him and didn't see him in the store anymore. I was the only cashier, so if he had to buy anything, he would have to come to my register. It was 9 o'clock already, and by 9:30 I was sure he had to have left. I had one more customer come through, and then it was time to start closing up. I turned off the register and refilled the bags at all the stations, then asked my lead if they needed help with anything. They declined and said I was good to go, so I headed out. The parking lot was mostly empty as usual, and I was relieved to see that nobody had parked next to my car. I walked steadily across the lot until a sudden beam of light blinded me. Someone turned on their bright headlights, facing right in front of me. I picked up the pace as I heard the car start driving, coming toward me very quickly. I got to my car and got in just as the other car sped up to me, then braked abruptly right in front of my car. My heart was racing. I locked the doors and hurried to start my car as a man got out and ran up to my door. He pulled on the handle aggressively, trying to open it. He was rushing, testing the back door too, but then he quickly got back in his car and sped away. I was horrified and in shock. My hands were so shaky. I wasn't sure I could even drive. I called the police right away, thinking the man was probably the same man I'd seen staring at me. But all of the security cameras weren't clear enough to make out his face or the license plate. So the case went stale pretty quickly. I haven't seen him since that incident, but I quit my job at the grocery store soon after because I would still have rushes of fear go through me every time I left work at night. I'm a 22-year-old male, going to a large university. I'm not a very talkative person, so relationships have always been a struggle for me. During my junior year of college, I started using Tinder to hopefully have more success in finding someone. I knew the app wasn't an ideal way of meeting people, but it felt easier for me than just going up to someone and talking to them. But after a few weeks, something really strange started coming up. Something that I never imagined would happen to me. During the first week or two, things were going about as expected. I matched with and talked to a few girls, but nothing really seemed to click with any of them. Then I matched with a girl named Natalia. Based on her profile, she went to the same university as me and had a lot of the same interests. We started chatting right away, and a few days later, I asked her out on a coffee date at a nearby cafe. I was really excited, and on the day of, I walked down to the cafe and saved the table for us. I texted her that I was there, but 30 minutes went by and she still hadn't shown. She wasn't responding anymore either. I was super bummed out because I really thought we were a good match. I waited another 15 minutes, then walked out. During the walk back to campus, though, a car pulled over on the side of the road next to me. A man rolled down the window and called out to me.
Hey, do you need a ride to campus?
I responded saying no thanks and kept walking. The guy drove off before I could even think much about it. Why would someone just ask a random person who's walking if they needed a ride? And what's even more disturbing, how did he know I was walking back to campus? I thought maybe he just made the assumption that I was a college kid, and since I was heading in the direction toward the campus, that's where he thought I was headed. But still, it was a strange encounter. I got back to my dorm room and took the day off from Tinder. I made some food, relaxed, and tried to not let it get to my head. A few days later, maybe even a whole week later, I went to my morning classes, then had work right after. It was only a 10-minute walk off campus. During this walk, less than halfway to my work, a car stops next to me on the road. It looked familiar, and I almost instantly recalled it as being the same car that stopped by me a week ago when I was walking back from the cafe. The guy rolled his window down, but I kept walking, trying to ignore him. A few seconds later, I heard the car door open and footsteps quickly approaching behind me. I looked back, seeing him running at me. I sprinted down the sidewalk, which had nobody nearby to help. My adrenaline was pumping. I don't even remember ever running out of breath. At some point, he stopped chasing me and turned back, getting in his car. I continued running for a minute, turning down a different path and taking the long way to work. I thought about calling the cops, but I had nothing to give them aside from a basic description of his car. But as I walked up to my place of work, I saw his car right outside the building. How did he know where I worked? I stayed out of sight and called the cops, hoping they'd come quick enough to catch him before he figured it out. And luckily, they did. Turns out the guy was using Tinder to try and lure me into his trap. His account was under the name Natalia. So that explained how he knew so much. But I never said where I worked or the route I took to walk to work. So he must have been stalking me for a whole week to have known where I worked, and the path I took to get there. He made no statements on what he planned to do once he got to me. Being a relatively young and shy person, I've started using dating apps to help me meet more people and hopefully find a lasting relationship. I struggle with putting myself out there, especially in public with people I've never met. So apps like Tinder are great for me to get comfortable talking with someone before actually meeting them in person. For reference, I'm a female in my early 20s, and I had been using Tinder for a little over a year at the time. Most of my interactions up until this point had been fine, usually either ending up dating for a couple months or just becoming friends. All of the breakups were mutual and had no hard feelings. Anyway, this began a couple months after my last relationship. I was talking to a guy who I will call Peter to respect their privacy. We talked for about 2 weeks on Tinder. From our back and forth texting, he seemed like a nice, somewhat shy person. But part of me liked that because I was shy as well. Eventually, he asked me out on a date, and we met up at a local restaurant later that week. Upon meeting him in person, nothing seemed off at first. One of my biggest fears is that they'll look nothing like they did in the pictures, but Peter didn't look any different, and he was just as soft-spoken as he was over text. Our conversation at dinner that night was really awkward, though. He barely spoke and kept looking around. Well, I'm not a big talker either, but I was trying really hard to get him to open up a bit. But he would give simple one-word answers. At one point, he even left the table, saying he forgot something in his car and didn't come back for almost 15 minutes, leaving me there alone. So, of course, when dinner was done with, I kindly told him that I didn't feel a great connection and didn't want to continue further in a relationship with him. He stood quietly and nodded, then walked to his car. I felt bad, but it is what it is, I guess. I got in my car and headed home. That night, I thought about Peter a few times, feeling weird now that I didn't have anyone to text. But I sat down and turned on a movie to clear my mind. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I heard soft footsteps coming up to my front door and stopping. I muted the TV and turned to face the door, still sitting on the couch. I was tired, but I knew I had heard someone. 30 seconds of anticipation went by before a few loud knocks banged on the door. It startled me, even though I was half expecting it. I got up and looked through the peephole, and to my surprise at the time, Peter was standing there. I cracked open the door just a little and stuck my head out. What are you doing here, Peter?" Peter looked at me, then turned away for a moment, looking around. This made me feel really uneasy, and I just shut the door and locked it, hoping he'd get the hint to leave my property. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps departing towards the driveway and a car turning on and leaving. I checked the window to make sure he was gone, then sat back on the couch. I think I was just too tired to realize the shock of the moment, but it wasn't until I sat back down that I realized that I had never given Peter my address. A really bad feeling surged through my body, and I went to check the window again to be safe. I didn't necessarily feel in danger at this point, but just worried that Peter may have something wrong with him and had grown too attached to me. I went to bed not long after and slept well through the night. In the morning, I made coffee and breakfast, and due to the cold, snowy weather, I stayed inside most of the day. It wasn't until I was bringing the trash out to the road that I noticed a set of footprints around the side of the house. I started following them. They went around both sides of the house and right up to the gate to the backyard, then off to the road. I tried to rethink what happened last night, but I was sure I heard Peter only walk up to the door and not around the house. So these footprints had to have been from the middle of the night while I was sleeping. Standing in my living room now, I was getting extremely uncomfortable and nervous. I know it sounds dumb, but my social anxiety was really trying to look for every reason not to call 911. At that time, though, I'm very thankful that my panic overtook my anxiety and got me to call the police. This decision is very likely what saved my life. Holding my phone after talking to a dispatcher, I stared at the ground and took deep breaths to keep my head straight. I'd never dealt with something like this, so my mind wasn't prepared to handle the stress. But as I stood there trying to calm my head, I heard footsteps in the snow outside the living room window. I'm not sure what else to describe how I felt other than just completely scared. The footsteps stopped outside the window and I began to back up slowly, trying to get to the kitchen. Then came a slight scraping sound, likely a knife being wedged between the window, trying to pry it open. I screamed bloody murder, which was an unfortunate reaction from the terror of it. Immediately, the footsteps ran around to the side of the house, followed by the forceful sound of the gate breaking open. I grabbed the first knife I saw in the kitchen and sprinted upstairs. Turning the corner, though, I saw a glimpse of Peter outside the glass back door, trying to force it open. I locked myself in the bathroom, crying and clutching onto the kitchen knife as I listened to the harsh banging, scraping, and beating on the back door. It honestly sounded like a bear trying to claw and smash its way inside. This went on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, which felt like forever. I thought of all the horrible things he planned on doing when he made his way inside, making me even more emotional. But then, a knock at the front door overcame the sound of the banging at the back door, which immediately stopped. An officer called out, and I ran straight to the front door. While Peter had run off, they were able to find him pretty quickly, and he admitted to his crimes, though he gave little reasoning for doing them. He truly just seemed crazy and unstable. It's terrifying to think how this happened from seemingly meeting up with a normal, friendly guy. This whole thing has given me terrible trust issues, and I stopped using dating apps. One of the scariest things was that the back door was almost completely destroyed, barely hanging on by the latch. Likely, if the police had shown up just minutes later, Peter would have made it inside, and who knows what he would have done if he had gotten to me. I broke things off of my ex a few years ago. He became a reckless person, unable to hold a job or any responsibilities, so it just didn't work out. Even being the person he was, though, I never thought he would do something like this. The few months after the breakup were quiet and peaceful. I was enjoying my single life, just going through the days. One night, though, I was driving back home from work, later than usual, and as I pulled into the driveway, I saw a man wearing all black standing outside a window on the left side of my house as if they were trying to look inside. This was obviously really creepy, and I pulled back out of the driveway and parked further down the road, calling the police. I waited for them to show up. Then, once they informed me that whoever it was had left, I was able to go inside. They asked if I had any idea who it could have been, but at the time, I said no. Again, I never thought of my ex as that kind of person, and there was nobody else I thought it could be. The next week went by without any problems as well, though I made sure all the windows were locked every night. One morning, though, I woke up to the sound of movement outside my bedroom window. It sounded like an animal moving around in a bush, though my immediate thought was of that man I'd seen peering through the windows last week. I jumped out of bed and put some clothes on. The blinds were covering the windows, so I knew nobody could see anything. But now I felt the need to see for myself if somebody was there or not. I didn't want to call the police again just because a squirrel was hanging out in the bush, so I pulled the blinds open. Nothing. I leaned my head closer to the window so I could see down the side of the house, and still, nobody was there. I sighed, immediately feeling safer, and continued about my morning as usual, then went off to work. Getting home rather late again, I was exhausted and cooked up a small dinner, then watched a bit of TV before deciding to go to bed early. I got up and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, but in the corner of my eye, I saw something horrifying. The window was open, just a small crack at the bottom, but I knew I had kept it locked, so either way, someone had broken it. I walked over and looked at it from up close, then pushed it shut. The latch that was used to lock it was gone, as if it had been ripped away. I felt trapped and scared, like I wasn't even in my own home anymore. I knew I had to call the police, but I began to fear making noise as the possibility of someone being in my house became more prevalent in my mind. I was just standing there for I don't know how long, listening to the silence of the house, before the sharp, sudden sound of my phone beeping made me shiver. I pulled it out of my pocket quickly, and immediately my stomach dropped. It was a text from my ex asking how I was doing. I stared at it, just in shock and trying to piece it together in my mind. Was this just a huge coincidence? Or was it not a coincidence at all? Was he watching me right now? Fear was taking over my body. I looked around frantically, shoving myself in a corner of the room so nobody could sneak up behind me. Then another text came in. He said, "We need to talk." I was trying to hold in my tears as I turned my phone on silent. I started making my way slowly to the front door. As I approached, I turned the knob and tried to open it quietly, though it made a rather loud creak. Immediately, a loud thump came from behind the door to my bedroom. I threw the front door open and sprinted outside and down the road. I hid on the side of a neighbor's house and called the police. They actually made it pretty quickly, and I walked over to my driveway when they arrived. After 2 officers went in, they came out a minute later holding my ex and dragging him into their car. He was pleading, saying he just wanted to talk to me and that he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he wasn't going to do anything other than talk to me. Unsurprisingly, though, he had a knife shoved in his pocket. That was hopefully the last time I'll ever see or hear from him again. Obviously, I don't believe that he just wanted to talk, but that was the story he stuck with, so I'll never know what he was actually trying to do. But him waiting in my bedroom like that with a knife, I know I was lucky to get out as safely as I did. A lot of people have ex-boyfriend or girlfriend stories, but mine was actually just a friend. I'm going to call him Brian, just to keep everything private. We had met my junior year of high school through a mutual friend and had become pretty close relatively fast. We didn't go to the same school as he lived about a half hour away from me, but we hung out every weekend, got food, drove around, and just talked. Sometimes we'd go to concerts and parties together too. I'd say we were each other's best friend for a really long time. He's always been a bit weird though. He'd text me all the time, and I mean sometimes 6 or 7 times in a row if I didn't respond quickly enough. But I knew he had a lot going on in life. Or so I thought. Me and the mutual friend who introduced us, Holly, were talking one night, and she said she thought he might have been lying about some pretty serious stuff. He had told both of us when we first met that his sister had cancer, but when him and Holly hung out, and it was brought up, his story was different. When Holly told me this, we decided to look through his mom's Facebook, which I just recently added. His mom posts basically everything, so we really couldn't find anything. And something that big would have definitely been posted. I've never met his sister since we never really hung out at his house, but I didn't find that weird because I didn't want anyone at my house either. While talking about this, we both shared other things that seemed a bit off to us, such as him saying that he might have cancer or that he was in the hospital for a very serious reason, but then would be completely fine just a few hours later. After going through everything with each other, we couldn't believe how much of a liar he was. I felt heartbroken that someone I called my best friend would lie about such awful things. We agreed to talk to him about it and, afterward, distance ourselves from him. I wanted to talk in person, but Holly had texted him first, and that's when I was bombarded with messages. It all started with him saying he had a seizure, which, after everything, I obviously didn't really believe him. He called me so many times while I was at work that it got to be too much. I decided to call Holly and see what was happening. When I did, she said he also went crazy on her. She ended up blocking his number because it got so bad. I didn't want to just ghost him, but this behavior was honestly disturbing. I decided to text him that I didn't want to be friends with someone who lies, especially about such sensitive stuff. After that, I didn't text him anymore. I didn't block him, though. I'm not sure why, but I just couldn't do it. I muted his notifications and calls, and that was that. A few more days went by of more muted calls and texts until my dad called me. He sounded really worried, asking if I was okay. I said yeah, calmly. Then I asked him why. He said that Brian called him and was asking about me, and apparently Brian told him that some pretty serious stuff happened to me. I told him to block his number and don't answer him anymore after explaining everything. It's even weirder because I don't know how he got my dad's number. Not long after that, my brother also told me that Brian messaged him on Instagram, saying he was going to hurt himself if I didn't answer him. He also texted one of my best friends all the same thing. To make everything so much worse, he said he was going to end himself the same way that my oldest brother had done. And he knew that. That was the last straw for me, and I decided to text him one more time all of my thoughts and feelings. And then I immediately blocked him after it was delivered. I thought that was the end, and for months, it was. Until one day while I was working, I saw him walk in through the front doors. My department was in the back of the store, so I could see everything. I slipped in the back and told my manager if anyone should ask, to say that I do not work there anymore. Lo and behold, he did actually ask my manager if I was there. I had to be escorted out by a coworker for the rest of the week, just to make sure he wasn't waiting in the parking lot when I got out of work. There was one night, about a month later, where his car was parked on the side of the street by my house when I got home from work. No one else was home, so I went to a friend's house for a few hours to be safe. I didn't think he would actually hurt me. I just didn't want to talk to him. Though while I didn't think he would hurt me, I also felt like I didn't really know who he truly was, which was scary. After that incident, I called his mother and told her everything. I didn't want him to stop by my house or my work anymore, and I didn't want to get the police involved. I loved his family, which made the situation really difficult. To this day, he makes fake accounts on sites to try and talk to me, or requests to follow me. It happens maybe twice a year. I know he's not mentally there, and I truly wish that he'd heal, but I want to share my story and let others know that your friends can be just as toxic as any intimate partner can be. And when people show you their true colors, try not to make excuses for them. Do what's best for you and your mental health, and make sure to keep yourself safe. Years ago, I lived in Frederick, Maryland, in an apartment with two good friends. We were all college students who lived the party life. I don't really feel comfortable using their real names in this story, so I'll just call them Peter and Kevin. I will also refer to myself as John for the same reason. I work at a local restaurant, and I was returning one night from a long shift. Peter and Kevin were on the couch having a few beers and just shooting the breeze. This is the usual sight when I come home from work. I grabbed a brew and sat down to chat with my friends when they told me about the wild event that had just happened a few hours earlier.
Dude, we saw the craziest shit while you were at work.
Peter said.
Yeah, there was this weird-ass dude just dancing around in our backyard with a white long-sleeve button-down in black slacks.
Whoa, dancing? I asked.
Yeah, dude. He was doing some Michael Jackson dance moves and making weird noises.
Kevin responded. They told me they told him to leave, and he ran out of the yard in a panic. We figured it was probably just some strange weirdo, since the small city is sort of filled with those types of folks. Besides, it sounds like he didn't cause any harm other than trespassing in our backyard. A week passed, and it was a nice Friday night. Me and the boys were playing board games at our dinner table and just hanging out. We were immersed into our game when all of a sudden we heard a very creepy laugh.
What the fuck was that?
Kevin asked. The three of us ran to the back window to take a look, and there he was, dancing and moonwalking. It was a midnight on a Friday. Does he not have anything better to do? I then stepped out and asked,
Hey man, what's going on?
He responded with just singing Michael Jackson phrases over and over again. At that point, I was getting kind of freaked out. This whole thing just seemed a bit odd and honestly frightening, since we had no clue if this guy was dangerous or not. The strangest part was that he even resembled Michael Jackson a bit. He had long black hair, pale skin, and a lengthy frame.
Okay, dude, you have 10 seconds to get the fuck out of my yard or I'm gonna beat the fuck out of you.
The man ran out of our yard after that and then escaped through the side gate. We watched him run down the street and then make a right near the main road that runs through Frederick. The three of us just laughed it off and thought that he was a mentally unstable stranger messing with us. The next morning, I had stepped outside to have a cigarette. I was alone in the house, since Kevin had already left for work, and Peter had spent the night at his girlfriend's house. As I was staring off, having my morning coffee and smoke, I noticed something laying in the yard. I went up to it, and what I saw made my heart skip a beat. It was a life-size dummy of a boy. I had a sigh of relief since I thought for a moment that it might have been an actual human body. I just picked it up and laughed. This must have been placed here by that dancing weirdo from last night, I thought to myself. I just laughed and brought it inside the house. Kevin and Peter are going to get a kick out of this. I had an idea that would make both Kevin and Peter shit bricks. When they got home, I had already placed the dummy in the bathroom standing in the shower, so that one of the guys would get a good jump scare when using the restroom. I thought this was hilarious at that moment. As expected, the guys and I had a fun time pranking each other with the dummy until we used it as a home decoration. About 2 days had passed since I had found the dummy. Kevin and I were home watching a movie when all of a sudden, we heard a loud bang at the front door.
Hey, where's my little boy?
Someone asked.
I need my little boy now.
He said again. Kevin stood up and peered through the blinds out the front door window. The man from the other night was back, and he seemed pissed that we had taken his doll. He banged on the door once again, almost like a lunatic trying to break in. Okay, that's enough.
Dude, you need to chill the fuck out.
The man started stomping and began yelling even louder.
I want my little boy. You need to give him back.
This guy was a total head case. Kevin and I stepped outside to confront him.
Dude, are you drunk?
Kevin asked. The man just stood there and stared at us with a menacing look. Then he ran off into the street. I remember him stopping to do some weird dance move and running off. What the fuck? I thought to myself as I glanced over at Kevin with a confused look. This next part of the story still haunts me every time I think about it. I was at work a few days later. The restaurant was empty and slow, but this was normal during weekdays. Our hostess came up to me and told me that someone had sat down and actually requested me by my name. I had gotten excited because I thought it would be this girl that I was talking to at the time. I headed to the front, excited to see who might have wanted to see me, and to my surprise, it was him, the man from the last few nights. He was just sitting there at a table in his usual Michael Jackson-styled attire, smiling and waving at me. I went back into the kitchen and I just froze in fear. How does he know where I work? I thought to myself. I peeked back out, and for the first time I could get a good look at his face. He wasn't anyone I recognized at all. I heard him yell from across the restaurant, saying,
"Oh, John, I'd like to place an order. I'd like to have my little boy back."
I got to say, this was the most embarrassing and scary thing that had probably ever happened to me. All of my coworkers were just giggling and laughing at me. One coworker asked who the person was, and I told her that he was a weird stalker who was harassing me. She asked him to leave, and he stood up and caused a scene.
"You're ignorant. I want my little boy, and John has my little boy."
He then started moonwalking and left the restaurant. That's enough. This was the last straw. It was time to get this guy to fuck the hell off for good. I remembered thinking, it was so odd for a grown man who must have been in his mid-30s to have all this time to be out at almost all hours of the night, acting like a lunatic. What was even more strange was him running around with a life-size child doll, calling it his boy. Frederick has some strange folks, but this definitely takes the cake. This wasn't some cute little joke. It was really weird and beginning to become harassment. I texted the guys and I'd let them know what happened. We all agreed to give him back his creepy doll, and if he continued to come around, we'll get the police involved. When I got home that day, the first thing I did was put the dummy on the porch, and I left a note. The note basically said,
"Hey, please take your boy and leave us the hell alone. If you ever come back around here, you'll seriously regret it."
Well, about an hour after leaving the dummy on the porch, I had stepped out to smoke a cigarette when I noticed it was gone. It had only been an hour, and this man must have already grabbed the dummy. However, the note that I had left him was still there on the porch. I always get an eerie feeling now because I think he's probably out in our neighborhood watching us. Years have passed, and I haven't been in that apartment for a very long time. But I always wonder what went on with that unstable man and why we were the target.